Alright, this is the first of what I assume will be many videos about the wisdom of the crowds hypothesis. I have no strong feelings one way or the other, supportive or against the wisdom of the crowds hypothesis, I don't believe. But it is something to think about. So let me start off with what is the wisdom of the crowds hypothesis. So this guy, way back when, like the 1800s or something, I don't know, I don't care, named Francis Galton, he wanted to prove that the ordinary person was stupid and that society needed to be run by a small handful of elites and experts in various different fields. That we needed people who were smarter than the rabble to sort of make decisions on our behalf, right? And he set out to prove this, but what he found in studies was that while individual, ordinary, non-expert people are often lacking in various qualities of truth compared to experts, when you take large groups of people and you average their thoughts together, you often get really, really close to the right answer, even closer than experts. Take guessing how many jelly beans are in a jar or something. You know, you could have one really smart guy take his time and like really measure and calculate, but you're probably not going to get as good of an answer, statistically, usually, as if you get 500 different people to all render a completely random guess off the top of their heads just by eyeballing it, and then you average together all of their answers, and what you end up with is usually pretty close to correct. So this idea that the masses might be stupid individually, but they're very smart collectively, has become a very influential idea in politics, and it's called the wisdom of the crowds hypothesis. So I'm going to go over a couple of potential uses or variations of the wisdom of the crowd hypothesis. Two specific ones today, okay? One is about Yelp, and one is about the Me Too movement, sort of, but kind of not really. So let's start with the Yelp one. So Yelp is a review site, right? And on Yelp, people often are known to be assholes. I don't know anybody who thinks of Yelp as like a really pleasant place with really accurate reviews. Yelp is usually thought of as a place where people are very cruel towards one another and where people leave nasty reviews for no apparent reason. And if they had a good experience, people just tend to like not think about it very much and move on with their life. But if they had a bad experience, then they go on Yelp and they tell everybody. So as a small business owner, the existence of Yelp is kind of a nightmare for you. Right, it's kind of a nightmare because you have all these people complaining about like next to nothing most of the time. So in my experience, most people don't like Yelp. Most people don't take Yelp very seriously. Same thing with any of these different reviews, you know, moviecritics.com or whatever. A lot of that is relentless, shallow criticism of films that people disliked. There's not a lot of positivity in these spaces. But some people, mostly libertarians, like free market libertarian types, they want to believe very strongly that the market can regulate itself, that bad businesses can be detected by consumers, reported by consumers, and then consumers will flock away from them. So the existence of things like Yelp to them is a modernization of that spontaneous process by which people in a market figure out the businesses that are bad, tell other people, get that information out there, and then allow people to flock away from it. So for libertarians, Yelp might not just be an angry site where people are mean to one another. Yelp might actually be the savior. It might be the new regulatory state. It might be exactly what libertarians need technologically to rely upon so that we no longer need as much government regulation. So some people argue that we should sort of strip away more government regulation and rely more on these voluntary networks of self-reporting on which businesses are good and which businesses are bad. So if you're a libertarian, I invite you to decide that you really love Yelp. And if you're not a libertarian, you're probably thinking, have you been on Yelp? That's the worst idea ever. Jesus fucking Christ, no, I don't want society to be operating off of Yelp reviews. That's terrible. Now notice that this puts libertarians on a very pro-wisdom of the crowd side, right? Because they're basically saying that the crowds on Yelp are smart, that they're smart and they're good, and they can come to good conclusions. And it puts anybody who is against the idea of having, our society be run by Yelp reviews instead of government regulators, on an anti-wisdom of the crowd side. They're like, no, we actually do need elites, we actually do need experts, we actually do need institutions. We can't trust these crowds to organically come to good conclusions, right? So now let me tell you about another wisdom of the crowds thing. Hashtag believe women. More specifically, whisper networks. Whisper networks are places where women who have experienced sexual harassment or assault in their workplaces or communities can go online and anonymously share with one another reports of what they've experienced and who they experienced it by, so that they can warn other women. The idea here is that the criminal justice system often fails women when it comes to sexual harassment and sexual violence, and that thus they need to turn to other non-official, non-institutional formats in order to get this information across to one another. And so whisper networks are seen by a lot of feminists as a very positive, very valuable thing. I'm going to put in the link in the description below a video by Lil Hoots, or Hoot. Well, you'll see in the description. They did a video just on whisper networks that I think is really good, and I strongly suggest watching it. And her investigation, I think, revealed a lot of potential downsides of whisper networks, actually, that should be taken seriously, and which she sort of just shrugged off to the side because they didn't support her feminist conclusion, which is that whisper networks are super good and important, and that you should hashtag believe women. The whisper networks that she analyzed seemed to be actually very much places of paranoia, very much places of rumor, very much places of falsehood, places where people could anonymously lie or exaggerate things, or just people with trauma seeing sexual harassment and assault everywhere as a result of that trauma, maybe where it isn't necessarily, which is an uncomfortable thing to talk about. So Hoots doesn't, really. Well, she addresses it, she brings up these flaws, but I think ultimately for her, those flaws are just, well, it's the best we got. And what else are we going to do? Trust the criminal justice system? So there is a version of this story where you say, no, Hoots, I don't agree. I don't think whisper networks are actually this beautiful, wonderful feminist thing. I don't trust the crowds here. I think that we could reform our criminal justice system, and yes, maybe in some ways it's broken, but we should still rely on our institutions and trust our institutions, and we should try to create better institutions if they're failing us, rather than just turn into a decentralized mass of internet rumors. So, again, we end up in a place where, like, hashtag believe women is sort of pro-wisdom of the crowds, right? The feminist stance here is sort of wisdom of the crowds, good. And the, I guess, anti-feminist stance, or pro-institutionalist, criminal justice system, innocent until proven guilty stance, is anti-wisdom of the crowds. It's the group cannot be trusted because the group will be filled with rumors and potential false accusations, right? So think about whether this puts people on the traditional left-right divide, the position it puts them in, because left-wing people will typically hate the idea of a free market capitalist society in which everything is run by Yelp reviews. John Oliver actually talked about this idea in a video of his, that we should run things based on Yelp reviews. He thought it was stupid. He thought it was crazy. He thought it was a big tech fever dream. But those same left-wing people will usually want you to hashtag believe women instead of trust in these whisper networks, even though this puts them on opposite sides of the wisdom of the crowds, right? This puts them in a weird position where they are pro-wisdom of the crowds in some circumstances and anti-wisdom of the crowds in others. I guess I'm not going to try to convince you to pick a side here today. I just want you to notice this and linger on the implications of it.